It's December 29th here in Seoul, and I'm Kim Dami. We begin with these stories making the headlines at this hour, starting with Washington's diplomacy with North Korea. The United States says it has no hostile intentions toward the North and is committed to diplomacy. The comment comes as the North Korean leader Kim Jong-un ordered his regime to speed up war preparations. A video circulating on social media appears to show Palestinian men and at least 2 children detained and stripped by the Israeli military in a stadium in northern Gaza, raising concerns over human rights violations. Pointing fingers and pointing guns lead nowhere, says the UN Chief Antonio Guterres. Calling 2023 a year of enormous suffering and violence, Guterres called on the international community to rebuild trust and hope in the new year. The U.S. has reaffirmed it has, quote, no hostile intent toward North Korea and remains committed to diplomacy. The comment from the State Department follows Kim Jong-un's call on Wednesday to beef up war preparations. Our North Korean affairs correspondent Kim Jong-sil starts us off.
The U.S. has made it clear that it has no hostile intent toward Pyongyang and remains committed to diplomacy. This is according to Yonhap News Agency on Friday in its Q&A with a U.S. State Department spokesperson. The official stressed that the U.S. seeks dialogue with Pyongyang without preconditions, even as the North has launched an unprecedented number of ballistic missiles. The U.S. official's comment comes after North Korean leader Kim Jong-un made orders on Wednesday to beef up the regime's war preparations. According to the North State-run Korean Central News Agency, during the year-end plenary session of the Central Committee of the North's ruling Workers' Party, Kim set forth the tasks to, quote, further accelerate war preparations, saying the U.S. is engaged in unprecedented acts of confrontation against the regime. Meanwhile, a U.S. expert on North Korea reiterated that Washington must shift its policy focus from denuclearization to arms control and reduction. Young-suk Lee, a former deputy assistant director of the Korea Mission Center at the CIA, recently wrote on the Foreign Policy Research Institute's website that the first step to this process is to, quote, politically accept North Korea's de facto status as a nuclear weapons state. Meanwhile, the South Korean National Intelligence Service said North Korea is highly likely to engage in provocative actions at the beginning of the year ahead of South Korea's general election in April and the U.S. presidential election in November. In a press release on Thursday, the NIS vowed to make efforts to establish early warning and preparedness systems with relevant ministries. Kim Jong-sil, Arirang News.
As part of a key year-end party meeting, North Korea discussed the developing light industry and reviewed the 2024 budget. According to the regime's state-run media on Friday, the ruling Workers' Party Central Committee convened the third day of its plenary meeting, where leader Kim Jong-un called for the sense of responsibility by light industry in producing the necessities for school children, such as uniforms. This is seen as Kim's efforts to promote youth welfare in a bid to sustain public support and ideological control. The party also reviewed next year's budget, which will be confirmed by the North's parliament on January 15th. President Yoon has called on South Korea's frontline soldiers to act first and report later in the event of an enemy provocation, with North Korea continuing to advance its nuclear weapons and missile programs. The South Korean leader on Thursday visited the Republic of Korea's Army's 5th Infantry Division to inspect military preparedness at the front line of the heavily demilitarized inter-Korean border. Commending their sense of duty during the holiday season, Yoon said the South Korean people expect a strong and dependable army and ordered they respond immediately and resolutely to an enemy provocation under the principle of acting first and reporting later. Also holding a meeting and a luncheon with the soldiers, the commander-in-chief promised to dramatically improve welfare for soldiers. On Thursday, President Yoon replaced all three of his top aides ahead of his third year in office. They are the current first Vice Foreign Minister Chang Ho-jin as his new National Security Advisor, and current Director of National Policy Lee Kwan-sub as his new Chief of Staff. Correspondent Kim Do-yeon reports.
New names for all three of President Yoon Suk-yeol's highest-ranking aides were announced on Thursday. First, the current First Vice Minister of Foreign Affairs, Chang Ho-jin, has been named the new National Security Advisor. He's a career diplomat who also was the ambassador to Russia before his latest position.
Security today extends beyond self-national defense to vital diplomatic relations with allies in other countries. The new National Security Advisor, we believe, is ideally suited to support the president in these crucial areas of diplomacy and security.
The appointment comes as the current National Security Advisor, Cho Tae-yong, is going through the parliamentary hearing process to take the vacant position of National Intelligence Service Chief. Chang said he's looking to continue pushing on from the diplomatic and security strategy of the administration, including strengthening cooperation with the U.S. and the new Indo-Pacific strategy.
In the 30 years since the end of the Cold War, the international order has reached a new phase with emerging geopolitical shifts. Assuming this responsibility during such a transitional period makes me feel an even greater sense of duty.
He also emphasized building on the audacious initiative that President Yoon laid out for his policy towards North Korea and other security issues. The current ambassador to Germany, Kim Jong-un, will replace Chang as the first vice minister. Kim is a known expert on North Korean issues with a stint as a special representative for Korean Peninsula Peace and Security Affairs, also known as the top nuclear envoy. In the meantime, the current presidential chief of staff, Kim Dae-gi, announced his resignation, saying President Yoon has named his current director of national policy, Lee Kwan-sub, to take the role effective January 1st. The new appointment came less than a month after a reshuffle that created the new Director of National Policy role. Lee was the first one to fill the post. He's a career public servant with known expertise in nuclear energy policy.
People's livelihoods are extremely challenging and macroeconomic risks still remain. I will work diligently. Please continue to encourage, support, and also critique me.
Replacing Lee as the Director of National Policy is an outsider. Song Tae-yoon, a professor of economics at Yonsei University, has been named. The top office says different economy-related government branches have long been asking for his insights, giving him experience both in theory and practice. Kim Do-yeon, Arirang News.
South Korea's Supreme Court once again upheld two separate rulings in favor of the Korean victims of wartime forced labor during Japan's colonial rule, ordering Japanese firms to compensate them. Our Foreign Affairs correspondent Pyongyang with details.
In September 1944, Mr. Hong and others were taken to Mitsubishi Heavy Industries' munitions factory in Hiroshima and were forced to work in harsh conditions before returning home, after the atomic bombing in the area in August the following year. Since then, they not only endure social and economic difficulties, but also suffer from health issues after being exposed to radiation. In 2013, Mr. Hong, along with other surviving victims and families of the late victims, filed a suit against the Japanese company, demanding compensation of 100 million Korean won, or about $77,000 per person. Another victim of forced labor, Mr. Lee, also filed a suit against a Japanese company called Hitachi Josen in 2015. Lee worked at the firm's shipyard from September 1944. South Korea's Supreme Court on Thursday ruled in favor of these two cases, ordering Mitsubishi and Hitachi to pay between 50 million to 150 million Korean won to each victim. That's about $38,000 to $111,000. Thursday's rulings are the second by the top court since 2018, when it made landmark rulings on separate forced labor cases, ordering two Japanese companies to compensate Korean victims, which strained diplomatic relations between Seoul and Tokyo. The top court upheld similar rulings last week, ordering Mitsubishi Heavy Industries and Nippon Steel to pay a maximum of 150 million won, or around $115,000 to each victim in compensation. But the Japanese companies are likely to continue refusing to pay, and the Korean government is expected to compensate the victims instead, using funds procured through a public foundation. The plan was announced earlier this year to improve relations with Japan.
In line with the government compensation plan announced in March, we plan to pay the compensation and damages for the delay through the Foundation for Victims of Forced Mobilization by Imperial Japan.
With such a plan already in place and taking into account Japan's continued denial, it's unlikely that the Japanese firms will pay the compensation themselves. Japanese companies have yet to pay the previously ordered compensation, claiming the statute of limitations for the cases has expired. But last week, for the very first time, the court clarified that this would not be allowed. Pyongyang, Arirang News.
A video circulating on social media appears to show Palestinian men and at least 2 children detained and stripped by the Israeli military in a stadium in northern Gaza. Now, the video shows 2 young boys stripped down to their underwear, walking and holding both their hands up as Israel Defense Forces soldiers give instructions. This comes as hundreds of Palestinian men and boys have been detained by the IDF in recent weeks. Now, Israel has not commented on the video, but in the past, the Israeli military said it has stripped detainees to ensure they were not carrying explosives. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres, in his New Year's message on Thursday, voiced hope for 2024 and urged for unity to rebuild trust. The UN chief said 2023 had been a year of enormous suffering, violence, and climate chaos, adding wars are growing in number and ferocity, and that trust is in short supply. He also went on to say that pointing fingers and pointing guns lead nowhere, calling on the international community to rebuild trust and restore hope in the new year. Guterres says the UN will also do its part in rallying the world for peace, sustainable development, and human rights. Sharing is caring. The phrase particularly touches many of our hearts around this time of the year, the holiday season. How to share our love and look out for others. Sarah Ko from Life Together may have some ideas. Welcome to the program, Sarah.
Hello.
Sarah,
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you too. Please introduce yourself and what Life Together is all about. And I'd also like to ask what has inspired you to do what you do?
Life Together works with students from welfare homes and those who have aged out as well. So we have programs, educational programs, fun activities, financial support, but the main idea is to provide steady relationships for students, particularly when they age out, so that they won't be left alone. As for inspiration, I think my husband and I are adoptive parents of 2 Korean kids, and so I've always been interested in kids from welfare homes. But when I learned that probably 90% of those who age out of the welfare home system have severe struggles to make it in society, I felt like it's time to do something.
That's amazing. Now, what do you think is it that the children that you work with need the most? Maybe just on a regular daily basis, but maybe during the holiday season as well.
Well, long term, what they need the most is one caring person. If they have one caring person in their life, they'll be able to make it. Somebody who will come alongside in the absence of family, somebody they can turn to for fun as well as advice and support. But especially during holidays, I think children feel especially alone because they don't have family to turn to.
Definitely. So one caring person. Then, Sarah, what do you suggest that we do, including myself, to be a help to those children or any children in need around the world?
I think the first thing is to actually see people. I mean, we all walk past people on the street, in the subway, even the ladies cleaning the bathrooms in the subway stations. To actually see the people that we walk by and get some sense of their lives, and then have compassion for the people, not judgment, but to have compassion, and then go near them and say, okay, what can I do to help? Maybe I can't give $100,000, and money actually isn't what's going to solve the problem. It's those relationships. But hey, I can play the guitar, and I could come and I could, teach a student how to play the guitar, or I can learn how to knit. I can teach somebody how to do something, or I can paint a picture. Something that everyone can do something. And it's finding that one thing that you can do to make a connection on a personal basis with another student.
Certainly. Sarah, I'm sure you've come across so many people and so many children. If you would like to share a story or anecdote that holds dear to your heart, please do.
I think the thing that strikes my heart the most is almost 100% of the students that I know would say when they're getting ready to age out, when they're high school seniors, is that they're terrified of the future. And I suppose the story that breaks my heart more is the students who say, when I ask them, what's the one thing that I could do for you to help make a difference in your life? And their response is, I wish I had a family. And so whether it's, stepping in to be that kind of family to someone is really what is the most important thing.
Definitely. All right, Sarah, thanks so much for sharing your stories and joining us today. Happy holidays and stay warm.
Thank you. Thank you.
South Korea has had some economic ups and downs this year. Our business correspondent Shin Ha-young has a wrap-up of the economy in the year 2023 and also what to expect in the new year 2024 through the key numbers.
For South Korea, the year 2023 was not easy on the economic front, but at the same time, it was a year where the country witnessed some positive signs. The first key number is 2%. It's the Bank of Korea's target level of inflation, and as widely expected, one of the economic keywords of 2023 was, of course, inflationary pressure. The Consumer Price Index, a key gauge of inflation, showed signs of slowing in the first half of 2023, with the on-year inflation rate dipping as low as 2.3% in July. But in the following months, inflation increased to 3% level due to higher oil costs and rising prices for some agricultural goods. In efforts to bring inflation down to its target level, South Korea's central bank kept the key interest rate unchanged at 3.5% for its seventh straight meeting. Meanwhile, the U.S. Fed has maintained its rate in the 5.25% to 5.5% range for a third consecutive time. With the Fed hinting at rate cuts for 2024, market watchers also expect possible rate cuts from the Bank of Korea. The key interest rate gap between South Korea and the U.S., which stands at 2 percentage points, will continue to be a factor to keep our eyes on in 2024 based on the monetary policy directions of the two countries. The second key figure is 13 months. South Korea's economic backbone, its exports, have been sluggish amid continued weak global demand for semiconductor chips, as well as a relatively slow reopening in China. However, toward the end of 2023, exports began showing some promising signs. Korea's exports in October saw an on-year rebound for the first time in 13 months thanks to greater shipments of automobiles and ships. Exports in November remained robust due to a rebound in semiconductor exports after 16 months, along with a rebound in rechargeable batteries and petrochemicals. And even though exports to China continued to decline for the 18th consecutive month, the overall trade balance as of November maintained a surplus for the 6 straight months. The last key figure is 1.4%. With such performances, the OECD, International Monetary Fund, Bank of Korea, and the South Korean government all forecast economic growth for 2023 at 1.4%, while the Asian Development Bank predicts growth of 1.3%. Then what will the South Korean economy look like in 2024? The general consensus among economic pundits is that the country's economy will expand by over 2% in 2024. The estimated figure from the OECD has been revised up to 2.3% from its previous report, with exports likely to pick up with a recovery in chip demand. However, there are various factors that Korea needs to focus on from both at home and from abroad. Key external uncertainties include financial instability due to global inflation and sustained lingering high key interest rates and geopolitical tensions arising from conflicts like the Israel-Hamas war and the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Additionally, concerns involve a deepening economic downturn in China as well as the pace of recovery in the global chip industry. On the domestic front, high levels of household debt could continue to weigh on private consumption and investment. But hopefully, the nation's strong resilience and the positive signals in 2023 will pave the way for a tangible economic recovery in 2024.
Good morning, I'm Kim Ji-young, and now we turn off to stories from around the world. As the year 2024 approaches, the US Census Bureau released figures on Thursday saying that the global population has exceeded the 8 billion mark. The Bureau said the world's population grew by 75 million people over the past year. While the United Nations estimated that the 8 billion threshold was passed in November 2022, announcing November 22nd as the day of 8 billion, the US Census Bureau suggested that the 8 billion mark was passed only in September this year. It explained that the discrepancy is due to countries with large populations such as India and Nigeria not having conducted censuses in over a decade. However, fertility rates are falling around the world, and the global population is getting older, with the world median age now at 32 and expected to hit 39 in 2060. Now moving on to our next story and the latest data from the Gun Violence Archive on Wednesday, which says that gun-related incidents have resulted in over 42,400 deaths and almost 36,000 injuries so far in 2023. The non-profit said over 1,600 of the victims were minors under 17 years of age. It also said that around 650 mass shootings took place across the US this year. Data show that over half the deaths were acts of suicide, with an average of 66 gun-related suicides per day. Now, former US Senator, co-founder of Kohl's department store chain, and former owner of NBA's Milwaukee Bucks, Herbert Kohl, died on Wednesday, aged 88. Kohl's death was announced by Herb Kohl Philanthropies, which stated that he died after a brief illness. Kohl was a Wisconsin Democrat who served in the U.S. Senate for 24 years. He was also a known philanthropist, donating millions for education in Wisconsin. An avid basketball fan, Kohl purchased his home team, the Milwaukee Bucks, back in 1985 for $18 million. Kohl sold the Bucks in 2014, after which he donated $100 million for the team's new home arena. Lastly, staying in the US, stores in the state of California with more than 500 employees will face fines from January 1st if they do not have a gender-neutral toy section. As the new state law, the Assembly Act 1084, signed by Democrat Governor Gavin Newsom in 2021, comes into force on January 1st and means that stores will sell childcare items or toys will be subjected to a maximum of $500 fine if they fail to create a gender-neutral toy section for kids 12 years old and under.
Good morning. The last workday of 2023 looks to be a dusty one. For today, mainly southern provinces will see high dust levels with a dust advisory in place for Chungcheong-Namdo province. Afternoon temperatures will be as mild as yesterday under cloudier skies with that dust. And you may have noticed less traffic lately. I'm guessing people have already started their New Year's getaway. In fact, many are heading to the East Coast to see the last sunset and first sunrise of the year. But with a mix of rain and snow in the forecast for most parts this weekend, we won't be able to see the last sunset clearly, but there is a better chance of checking out the first sunrise, and at least you won't be shivering in freezing temperatures. That's Korea for you, and here's a look at the international weather conditions.
We thank you for watching New Day at Arirang. We'll be back next Monday in the new year. Goodbye.